Okay, so this is episode 22 of Following Mechanical Turks. So today we're going to continue what we started last time, taking a look at mostly the aggregated keenness measurements, aggregated information about words, so we can pull out ones that might be significant, or perhaps in particular ones that might be illuminating when put in relief to other words. Right?
Yeah.
So really briefly, let me just share my screen quickly here. Okay, so we updated the data. So as we talked about last time, looking at the keenness measures previously, what we hadn't accounted for was weighting them by number of available hits. So this comes up in the just the raw counts, right? So if we look at it's a sample collected, processed, which doesn't have any public issues. So we talked about this quite a while ago, that you get one response or certain data if you just take all of the hits in the lists and treat them as equal, right? In fact, let me just pull up the public A sample. So to underscore this, these are the listings that we collected, but those include a number of available hits. So if you count this one way, right, you get certain information if you just treat these as a job. If, however, you weight these by their number of available hits, obviously those counts are going to change, because if this job has 50,000 available hits, but here it's only counting once. If you weight it this way, it's counting 50,000 times, right?
Yeah.
And there's an argument to be made for viewing it each way. The Turker will only see this listing, right? They won't see 50,000 listings. They'll see it once, and it'll just be the case that it has this many available hits. But from the systemic perspective, this is the bulk of the listings, right? As we can see in the counts, and these are just raw counts, right, of unigrams, bigrams, trigrams. We've broken them into just the default, which is treating each one of these individually. But then there also is a count here for if we weight them. They're called expanded, although that's probably not the preferred nomenclature. What they really are is weighted by available hits.
Yeah, the frequency jumps and the order changes.
Yep. So there's a shift where if we look at them essentially flat, survey is number one. Its frequency is, what is that, over 12,000. But if we expand that, survey falls down to 5, and its frequency is what? It's over 1 million, correct? So it does change things. I mean, in some cases, it'll change them significantly depending upon what you're looking at. But anyway, so that's raw counts for that. We realized we need to be doing that as well for the keenness measurements, because if we look at the keenness measures, we'll just take 0 here. Previously, we just had them treating those flat. And it turns out, understandably, if you account for weighting them by available hits, it does change things. So here for 0 as our measurements, we see most of them are, unsurprisingly, these terms that deal with sort of bot information, right? Not really human readable. And at the other end of the spectrum, the terms that are most representative of the reference, we get survey, minute, study. if you weight these by available hits, we still have this up here, but it's changed now to value, input, brand, and so forth. So I went ahead and did all of the measurements now with that weighting, and I just folded them into the spreadsheets, right? So now we have, as we do with the counts, right, a default and then an expanded version, bigram default, bigram so expanded version. So there's a symmetry now between the count information and the keenness measurements. This also then manifests in the corresponding keenness diagrams. Now I've changed how these are represented. These were in a folder of separate PDFs because there were, that would be, I think, 15 of them, because there were 5 categories: unigrams, bigrams, trigrams, correct?
Yeah.
So once you add a weighted version, that doubles because there's now a weighted version of each. So it became a little cumbersome to have 30 of those in a folder because their names weren't super descriptive. And if you did it, just if you described them textually, they wouldn't necessarily go in an order that was meaningful because it would go alphabetically.
Right.
So you'd be hunting around. Now they're sequenced in a logical order. You actually have to download the PDF in order to see it, which is a complication. But they're actually, now they go 0 unigrams, then 0 unigrams weighted, and then it scales up from that. I'm just going to save it here to my desktop. Because when you look at it in the preview, it's not necessarily clear what you're seeing. But if you open it in, and it's not going to do it here either. If you open it in a reader program, there are essentially bookmarks that explicate what you're seeing there.
Yeah, I missed those too.
So let me pull over. So this, for example, I'm on my Mac. So this is just technically, if you're using a Mac, it's the table of contents because it has a separate thing for bookmarks. One of the little frustrations, if you're using Adobe Reader, it just has bookmarks and pages. Mac's default preview application, it has a separate layer of bookmarks. So even though it's the same name, bookmark, it doesn't show it. It will show if you look at table of contents because that's the Acrobat Reader, it uses bookmarks and they manifest here. Anyway, it just means they're available on both Mac and Windows. I mean, if I used Acrobat Reader on my Mac, it would show up as well. That information is embedded. So here's the order, right? And these names can be a little inexplicable. It's just because they're pulled from those precise spreadsheets, right? Basically, I mean, they're not literally because they're actually coming from the R data. But so we've got unigram 0 keenness, then unigram expanded 0 keenness. And this lets us see the difference here, pretty starkly, right? Because here is the one we had previously where it's flat, and we can see all of these terms are the sort of bot terms. And then when you get to the other end, the chi-square is pretty flat. That stays pretty consistent, but you can see, I mean, the bars here just don't shoot up very much. If we expand that out, or if we weight it by terms, we can see the bars start to expand a little bit on the reference side here. And now it's dominated by this ad hoc match, but then we start to see a lot more sort of human-centered terms, right? Value, input, brand, calories, those kinds of things. Console. So it does provide not only richness to the data, but it also maps with what we were doing, right? It would be unusual methodologically to weight the count information both by if it's flat, but also if it's weighted by hits, and then not do that in the keenness measures as well, right? So that's built out. That's kind of what I was doing previously. I really haven't added to the terms we can now see with this, but Nathaniel, I know you were kind of poking around with that to take a look at if we can, here under this where is it? Yeah, it's this page here called preliminary findings. It's still in the data folder. It's just this one here, preliminary data findings. Last time we were talking about how these were, the tried and true one we've been looking at was transcribing versus summarizing. I haven't really run the word level examinations of those we've considered, but these were popping out in like, well, how does this manifest differently in tiers? This one seems like a different cognitive task, right? Because transcribing seems what we can potentially call, depending on how we're viewing cognitive tasks, right? But I mean, if we're using Polanyi's split, which is sort of binary, he acknowledges low skill and high skill, but doesn't really parse things just into those, because what he's looking at are things that resist automation. Well, how he's been used, really. How his paradox has been used looks at how those things resist automation, right? Things that are very, what we would call high skill, low skill in a kind of economic sense, are in his paradox on the same side because they resist automation. And then there's this kind of middle area, although even that may not be, it's not necessarily middle, because the spectrum from high and low, there is also, the sort of, if you're using that parsing, below low that does get automated well.
Right.
But anyway, this parsing can be illuminating because it's like these classes of jobs that in one context we'd call high and low. In this context, we see them as resist automation, does not resist automation well. And we were talking last time about how this same split seems to be really illuminating right now, because it very closely matches under the pandemic lockdown what we see as essential and non-essential, right? So it's a good mapping of right now what's essential are things like pandemic researchers, politicians, but also grocery clerks, and stock boys. That's a gender term. Stockers, I suppose. Those who deliver food, right? So, and this schism is playing up right now because people in popular media are pointing out, we don't pay these people well, and yet they're essential. We don't value them. I mean, they're even seeing this now with healthcare workers who are getting furloughed. We value them. Maybe we pay lip service to their value, but we don't pay them well. We call them low skill, not in the case of healthcare workers, but certainly in the case of, stockers.
Yeah.
So this parsing is starting to reassert itself again. Essential and non-essential very much replicates, can be automated easily, cannot be automated easily.
Yeah.
Anywho, so what were you looking at in terms of these concepts?
A few quick things is that generally, one of my first notes just going through the PDFs of those diagrams a little more thoroughly is, I think, how I guess valid is the word, the categories we have seem to really work in terms of where there's overlap. And so our scheme of zero compensation, penny compensation, low, middle, and high really seems to pan out in terms of the uniqueness of what we're seeing in those particular compensation levels.
Even though acknowledging, I bet if we parse that differently,
sure,
we see different stuff.
Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? So our parsing is valid in the sense of showing us something.
Right.
But just for a course example, even if we did something like 6 tiers, and just broke this up finer or fewer, zero, penny, and then, or if we parsed it in different ways. But yeah, sure, definitely the parsing we've got now does show us some stuff with an understanding that it's dependent on how you parse.
Right. So one thing is, even just going through it, I didn't see summary is not, particularly in the weighted ones, isn't really showing up a whole lot. So there's much more uses of transcribe than there are summaries, although some of those are buried in the if you go actually like, so I would find some of these keywords,
Yeah, I got it pulled up here.
yeah, and then go into the hit itself and you would see some summarizing. But anyway, so going through it, I was looking at words like extract and audit, and thinking about how those might work. And what was really interesting, if you go to one that showed to me, if the weighted bottom 20.
Yeah, sorry. And one really useful thing about having these diagrams is, since this is text, you can still do searches here. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
These diagrams spit these out such there are bars and then there's text. So you can actually, as I did here, just pull up the search terms, right? So we can see, yeah, you're right. If we do summary here, this is an unweighted one, top 20 unweighted. It's kind of in the middle of the, I mean, all of these are going to be indicative, right?
Yeah.
Let's see, this is a weighted, yeah, so curiously, it's top 20 if it's unweighted. Here it's, yeah, it's top 20 in the bigrams if it's expanded.
Yeah, and in the trigram.
Trigram, summarize, oh yeah, summarize the image, categorize something. Yeah, sorry, okay, and so we were looking at what category?
The weighted bottom 20.
Okay, so of unigrams?
Bigrams, sorry.
Bigrams, bottom 20, expanded, there we go, okay.
Yeah, so if you look at the top one, we got purchase item, shop, receipt. A lot of these are from the same, this big chunk. So the four at the bottom, right? We got Google and into Google, string into, those all appear to be from a single hit. But this top part, it appears to be, and there's the instructions are actually appear to be separate. They're a link outside of the hit.
Yeah.
The sense I get is they're receipts that are probably bad copies. And so they're not readable by a machine. And so it's essentially a task that's, right, if the shopping receipt image is readable, then extract from it the basic information from the receipt. So that was just kind of an interesting one, that's a kind of bottom 20, which isn't nothing. But that I think it gets at the split between low and high labor or easily automated or not, is that this kind of task where if it was a good picture of a receipt, a computer could, just ocular character recognition and potentially extract it. But if the image quality isn't good enough, then you've got to get a set of human eyes. And so that seems to bump it up in terms of compensation, is that the compensation seems to be somewhat related to the quality of the image that's available for looking at that receipt.
Oh, okay. So this is in the bottom 20, but the worse, you're suggesting the worse the image quality is, the higher that would be compensated?
I mean, something like that, right? So that again, the idea of looking at a receipt and just pulling out information, I'd expected to see that in the, I don't know, lower compensation, but the idea then that this task is being identified based on the difficulty of visually scanning it and recognizing it. It just struck me early, sort of as a place to start to precisely get at that easily automated versus not, is that one of the things that makes potentially mechanical Turk labor valuable is not, again, going back to our sort of, potentially this dead horse that I'm beating, is not a kind of abstract intellectual work, but literally the kind of thinking of the human body as a series of sensors, and needing that kind of, right, that a computer can't quite parse a letter if that letter isn't a, continuous mark or stroke. whereas a human being could potentially, with its, eyes and knowledge of language, fill in. So that was just something that, because I was, and that was also transcribe was a word that popped out there, and extract. And so I was mostly started by just drilling into how the word extract was being used relative to the word transcribe.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, so that's interesting. So because in a sense, when we talk about image quality, right? So how hard is this to interpret? All of that is predicated on a anthropocentric notion of difficulty, right?
right,
Even the machine, where we would say, well, it's potentially objective. Can you get characters out of this or not? But that is a human-centric notion of what valuable sight is. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
It's defining it in, well, that's what I want, is for you to recognize these human generated characters. And if you can't do it, you're not as good of an AI system. Whereas, the AI could say, no, my eyes are vastly better than yours.
Right.
Your stuff just isn't important to me, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's
No,
like
but
a fly saying to us, you don't have compound eyes. You can only see one facet of
yeah,
what you're looking at,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
that one popped up.
yeah. So that was, and then the Google one on there was also interesting, which is it's asking people to copy a string into Google and record the autofill results,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting. So
It does make sense to, I mean, it makes an intuitive sense that this is bottom 20 material, doesn't it?
right,
Because it's like, yeah, I can copy in a string and see what it says, or I can look at this receipt and type in the numbers, versus something that's asking you, what is the emotional content of this video clip?
right. Yeah, and so then the penny stuff was, as you had already discussed, a lot of these are sort of threshold tasks. So if you go to the bigram weighted penny,
Let's see. So we got
or
expanded. There we go.
that a lot of these pre-screen, these are things you fill out for a penny, and if you're what you want, if you're what they want, whoever put the hit, then you get interviewed, and then you get like $20 for the interview.
Yeah.
So some of these penny ones are, which is interesting, right? It's not zero. There's some incentivizing, but a lot of these are things you do within Mechanical Turks that will lead you to a human intelligence task that could conceivably take place outside of, right? At that point, you're now going to do an interview that would be conducted some other way.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that kind of popped up in the data is the things that compensated to a respectable degree, potentially reaching or maybe exceeding minimum wage. Many of them eluded capture on Mechanical Turk at all, right? And many of them were, what was on Turk was like, do this, and you have a chance at getting a minimum wage compensation value. Or as we saw, the ones that are in just raw terms, the highest compensated, they all said something like, this is for a specific person. This is not for you,
Right.
The high compensated ones, literally said, I am looking for this person identified as an ID number. It's just, it had to be posted there, which is kind of interesting in terms of use of Mechanical Turk. It's like, from an economic perspective, to actually reach something like a minimum wage, you're not going to be doing your work on Mechanical Turk. It's just like a billboard for a job post somewhere else,
Which is interesting. Yeah, I wonder if anybody has used Mechanical Turk as a dating service. Or my first thing is, when you're talking about looking for a specific person, if my probably having spent way too many years reading espionage novels, there's coded that those ad hoc hits aren't actually for bots, they're for Russian sleeper agents.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly those kinds of things are used for those purposes. I'd have to poke around to see if anyone's looked into Mechanical Turk for that. But no, it's well established that things like discussion boards,
Yeah,
take on the role of what are they, like the Conelrad stations, or or
oh,
number
yeah,
stations, that used to be, and I think in some cases still are, broadcast over the air, which were these strange, well, I'm talking to you, I'm preaching to the choir, but they would,
yeah,
be these radio broadcasts that would just periodically have a strange voice saying seemingly random numbers that were, it's now understood,
yeah,
signals to spies in the field.
yeah. Now, also, what's interesting then about this penny, the one you've got up, is the pretty clear, not, I mean, again, clear given the way that we've staged it. The split between its opposite down at the bottom, which
Mhm.
are mostly a lot of those low 20.
Yeah.
In fact, that VO2, that's if you get on the hit that's asking you to look at those receipts that are less than readable. That's I think within Turk it's a link to a set of instructions. So it's instruction version 02.
Right. Let's see what we pull up there.
So a lot of
And what was
the
that, a bigram?
yeah,
Yeah. And so, of course, when you're looking at, unigrams, bigrams, trigrams, the number of uh, bigrams in this case, whether it's weighted or not, is always going to be identical because it's the same number of things. It's just how frequently they occur. Hold on, this is starting. It's kicking my fan on in my computer. Here we go.
yeah.
So what is it there? 32184. I became intimately familiar with these counts.
Hmm.
Let's let it process though. 32184. So it's what, VO2. Yeah, it's going to take it a while to spin through that.
But a lot of the things that were, I forget now. There's a term for that, right? I keep forgetting it. The blue bars and then the gray bars. You describe those gray bars as the
The reference,
reference. Here we go.
and in
Yeah.
fact, it's over here in the key.
Oh, there we go. That the bulk of those are from the bottom 20, and
Yeah, which is interesting because, well, that's not necessarily true. I was going to say when they're flat like this, a lot of times we were seeing in the reference, because the reference includes everything other than the category we're looking at, right?
right,
So a lot of times we were seeing the middle 60 just because that's the largest.
right, right.
Whereas when they're weighted by available hits, that's no longer necessarily the case,
Yeah,
because it's still, the way we computed this numerically, it's still the middle 60 in terms of the post, but the weighting then, can that can blow one category way up, right?
yeah. So what's really interesting is, and this is kind of what I was getting at too, in terms of thinking about how valid or useful our categories are, is that the weighted penny bigram, its referent is the next compensation level, which suggests there's that our use of compensation levels as categories makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's particularly interesting is, I mean, I'd probably, like, maybe you or other people might have thought, right, that the high end compensation level would potentially be the referent for the low
Mm-hmm.
compensation level, right? If you think of the referent as a kind of juxtaposition, but what's interesting is the referent for the penny is the bottom 20, which suggests maybe something about these lower,
Yeah.
that there's that essentially what I think what I'm getting at is that there's more nuance at these lower levels than I thought there might have been.
Hmm. And as I've mentioned, one thing we can do is shift what the reference is. So if we just wanted to say examine the penny and the bottom 20, we can set that up. It's you just have to run it again. By default, I was using the reference as all the other categories because that would allow the one you're examining to pop. It's essentially, what makes this unique or characteristic
Yeah.
in the whole thing. But we can do something like just put penny against bottom 20, in any permutation, expanded, unigram, bigram, trigram. Just a little more work, but it's not a big deal to do.
And then a couple other things, that all that election stuff
Yeah.
that we were seeing was Wikipedia based tasks. So that was the unweighted penny, at both the bigram and the unigram.
Yeah, the weirdness of that. So say more about that. I mean, because it makes sense because we see both Wikipedia and elect. What's it talking about?
It's wanting to course. It essentially wants. It's got a lead. It looks like someone's got a list, or someone had a list of party leaders in Canada, and they wanted election dates for those party leaders.
Yeah.
So go into Wikipedia and plug in the election date for that person and their party affiliation.
Basically augmenting Wikipedia data.
Yeah.
I wonder why it's not finding that one. This is just grinding along. Well, that also underscores something which, despite the volume of stuff we collect, if there's something like a high number of available hits, single or, a small group of posts can have an outsized effect on the data as a whole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, here you'd say, well, overall, this is what it's talking about. And it's like, well, not really. One post is talking about that. But in terms of the bulk of the stuff, it constitutes quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, if you particularly look at this, if you go to the bigram for that with all the election, just about every bigram that's on that chart is from that. Those are almost all from that hit. It's interesting then too, is it's referent then is a lot of the mental health stuff.
Yeah. And so these are not weighted, which suggests probably there were multiple posts, but not a ton of available hits for it. Because it looks like it's getting washed out in the expanded version of these things.
Yeah, if you go into the weighted, then it pretty much goes away
for
the election stuff.
Which one would that be under? Unigrams or?
I'm looking at bigrams expanded or weighted.
And that's what, penny?
Yeah.
Yeah, so here, that's a good demonstration. So bigram penny keyness, we see it dominated by this election Wikipedia stuff, right? But if we bump up to weighting it by hits, we get survey attempt, market research, survey, something is getting clipped.
Yeah. And a lot of those are those pre-screening, complete this really quick, and then if you're what we want, then we interview you and pay you $20.
Yeah, so we can see a difference, an informative difference between when you're just treating those flat and when you're weighting them by available hits. You get a very different characterization.
Which then didn't happen if you go to the top 20
Bigram?
bigrams, yeah, that you've got, hit, banner, and then when you go to the weighted one,
Brave New World stuff.
which I thought would potentially be like that election stuff, that we'd see a lot of the Brave New World stuff popping up, but then when you expanded it, it'd go away. But that's a lot of that sentiment analysis, which I think not surprisingly is in the top
Yeah.
20. It's sentiment analysis, and also then sort of summarizing images,
Uh-huh.
and then categorizing and summarizing images. Which is interesting that those are that sentiment analysis and describing or summarizing images is, and that's where we do see summary is
Right.
is here too. So those things being linked together.
Yeah, this is going in the other direction in the sense that the unweighted one is maybe a little generic for the top 20. Right. So this is the highest compensation tier. Bigrams. I mean, it shows us some things, brand, right?
Yeah.
Survey, which that's something maybe that makes sense there, because having people take surveys might be comparatively well compensated.
Yeah.
It's interestingly in relief to things like Hurricane Harvey, which is associated with trauma.
Well, now go to that bigram expanded top 20. Now, what's interesting is if you see damage and structure, those are a series of images that people are being asked to choose the damage level of the house in the center of the image.
Wow.
And I want to dig more into that I wonder if that's
it's probably insurance purposes.
And I wonder if it's tied to Hurricane Harvey, given that
very much. Yeah. I mean, does it say in the hit itself?
No, it's just a series of images, and it says, look at the image and look at the house in the center of the image and assess its damage level. Which is, again, associated not necessarily with like sentiment analysis. It's more, and it's also not extracting, right? So it's not like looking at this poor copy of a receipt.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of judgment or assessment even. And
yes.
That's normally I'd been thinking of, well, they're either doing some kind of, I was thinking in binary, right? There's some kind of something that involves sentiment, right? So mental health, Brave New World, right? Or look at this receipt and extract something, or read this Wikipedia entry and whatever. But this damage stuff is now like assess or judge, which is kind of interesting. And I don't know if they actually use the word assess.
I didn't see that one pop up. I just did a search in the data because it doesn't seem to pop up much in keenness measurements, right?
But to a certain extent, that's kind of how I would look at, that choose damage level, that if we had to pick a verb that would group that under, that seems less, it's not summary, it's not extraction, it's not, analysis. It's a kind of,
yeah, it's because, just the diagrams, you're not getting anything for assess. I mean, I'm not even going to spell it out because it starts to cancel after assay.
yeah.
Of course, I'm repeatedly writing ass up there.
Sure.
Nothing for judge. I mean, there's not even a JU. Now, these are just the diagrams. Of course, you're getting, the top and the bottom slice there.
Yeah.
But it's telling, right, that's a term, a term we would use to represent a concept, right? Where, you're making this judgment of damage or assessment of damage, but that's not the language that's used there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get a computer to to look at your car and say, dude's car got a little dinged up.
Right.
And
Draw a box
that's
around whole buildings in an image and label the damage. That's an interesting one too. Even identifying damage, because I mean, it'd be interesting to see like how good are cars at recognizing this vehicle's been hit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure right now there's work underway to automate that for insurance purposes, right? You can already take a picture of your car and send it in. If a machine learning algorithm is able to point out, okay, well, this is just a ding, this will buff right out. But I mean, that seems like maybe a non-trivial task, because the range of damage that could occur, it would probably have to build up a notion of this is what a car looks like. This is what other than a car. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And that seems to be different than, so if you look at this, draw a box around a centermost building and select appropriate damage level, that's showing up in top 20 compensation. Then the middle 60, so pop over to the weighted bigram for middle 60.
Let's see, so bigram, it would be middle 60, there we go.
Banded. So you see a lot of these boundary,
right?
It's trying to find sort of where particular shapes in an image begin or end. So what I liked about this transition is in the middle 60, you get essentially draw a box around this house. And then when you go to top 20, it's identify the object and then also assess it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a tiered kind of, right, that, which, and I think that middle 60, that might be akin to some of that, prove you're not a robot, right? Identify the street sign in this.
Right.
Part of what that task is it's identifying the object boundary. Right. It's not just identifying the street sign. There's something about knowing the particularly, right, any kind of image that's got depth to it.
Right. Yeah. Is this a image in 3-dimensional space, or are you seeing it? Yep. Yeah, I see what you mean.
But is that street sign now in need of repair? You get a bump in compensation for being able to say that.
And as we've pointed out, and as is well established, Mechanical Turk, at least previously, if not currently, one of its sort of, its bread and butter was training learning algorithms, right? I'm assuming that's still probably going on in different ways. That may be indeed what we're looking at with this damage stuff, right? You need a group of humans to establish, well, this is what a unsorta and really damaged house looks like, so that you get a corpus of material you can give to a machine to learn. This is what an unsorta.
Right, because to know whether the house is damaged, you've got to have some idea of what that's not supposed, right? I mean, I'm recalling when we had to have our house fixed after the fire, and the walls were taken down, and they were showing me all the stuff that wasn't up to code. And I knew enough about wires to look at that and go, yeah, that's not right. I didn't know what was wrong with it or how to fix it, but I could look at it and go, I don't think wires are supposed to do that. But right, I've got a concept that allows me to assess what it is that I'm. And right, as you're saying, that's a lot of what the struggle with, artificial intelligence is. You've got to give it a corpus of things it can use to then note if something is novel or.
Yeah. And again, these things are all, it's not objective. I mean, as we've mentioned before, I want you to do this as a human would do it, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, artificial intelligence has always had a central kind of contradiction, not contradiction, but frustration at its core, which is we don't want to find artificial intelligence. We found that repeatedly. The internet is vastly more intelligent than us. And I mean, humanity.
Right.
If you can remove yourself from it, the internet is vastly, even at this young age, more intelligent than us. That's not what we want. What we want is to look into a silicon mirror. What we want is to look at ourselves in something else. it's not artificial intelligence, it's artificial humanity. That's what we see.
Right. It's artificial intelligence.
Right. Yep. Faked artificial intelligence. Well, yeah, I'll have to wrap up here in a bit. But what you might do is here on this preliminary data page, and I realize, as unsurprisingly, these things have kind of gotten spread out, and it's hard to exactly know where stuff is.
Yeah.
But here under hit data, there's just this simple Google Doc that's preliminary data findings, and that's broken into things we were noticing just in the frequency stuff, and now things in categories. If you want to add that here,
yeah,
and then I'm going to be applying word level stuff, which is here in the outline, to these kind of things. But kind of what we need is a list of terms or pairs that I can do that to. I think right now what you're looking at is more this categorizing stuff. So what you're seeing in the distinction between particular compensation tiers, right? That's kind of global statements about here's differences we can see in the penny versus the bottom 20, right? So I think those observations might go here.
Yeah.
And then essentially the word level stuff may allow us to see either some of these things on a micro level, or they may allow us to see different stuff. Like I haven't yet run these things here on word level stuff. It's just timing. Once the semester ends, if this interminable semester ever does.
Right. Yes. Yeah, somebody just the news organization yesterday, I think was day 100 since China started reporting coronavirus cases.
Yeah. We're at the start of April.
Yes. Well, it's actually, we're 10 days into April. We're getting into the middle now, buddy.
Everything's blurred.
Yeah.
I also recently kept thinking it was 2022. I was tacitly convinced of that. I was writing it on stuff, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then I kind of had to stop and think, wait.
And by writing on stuff, you mean just on your walls.
Yeah.
Like runes.
Crayon and fecal matter.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, the more I got into the what is it? The tool we're using to generate these charts. Viz.
Those are separate things. So these charts are just spit out by R.
Okay.
Are you talking about LDA Viz?
Yeah.
So LDA Viz is just the the bubble chart thing.
That's right. Okay. But yeah, these
are all R packages.
Yeah. So this has been, and the weighted ones I think are particularly interesting. But I think it's good to use both, and but I think too that when this gets written up, right, that particularly the ones where we see a bunch of stuff showing up in the unweighted ones that then disappears in the expanded ones is, a reminder that what we're seeing is a function of how we're seeing it is, I can go from one page of a PDF to another, and that compensation level looks totally different.
Yeah. Characterization of these in a couple of these places is radically different.
Yeah. But I think that's useful for us because are we interested in what the Turker sees?
Yeah.
Or are we interested in how the system itself sees this? And I think for the first one, I think the expanded ones are going to be of more interest to us, because it seems like the second publication we're interested in will then look at that, right? The unweighted ones, right? What does the Turker see?
That's an interesting point, because one thing I was looking at is we haven't at all dealt with the
I was just thinking, the B sample. Yeah.
The B sample may be more relevant later because it's lower scale, right? It's 100 a pop. Is that correct? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's less.
Um, but it's the sample that gives us much more sophisticated data,
Yeah,
but it's just, there's not nearly as much of it because trying to get more sensitive data
yeah.
was
Way more
later.
columns. Yeah,
Yeah, so it's 100 a pop. It was going on at the same time. So I think realistically, this first paper isn't going to acknowledge the B sample at all. But the
I don't
B
think
sample
so.
may come up later, as you say, if we're doing things like posting jobs for Turkers to provide
Yeah,
information about their
I,
perspective on it.
I think the B sample and the unweighted ones, those might be our you know footholds into the second one.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, I mean, when we look at these, it's not just as sometimes we might think, well, which one is more accurate? This one's more accurate because it accounts for hits, but it's like it's not a question of
Yeah.
accuracy. It's not more accurate if you're a Turker.
No,
Then
if you're a
it's
Turker,
inaccurate. That
if
is
you're a
not your
Turker,
encounter.
those expanded ones don't make any sense at all.
Yeah,
And a Turker might well, I mean, right? I can imagine a Turker looking at our study going, yeah, but that's not what it,
yeah.
right?
That's
We're
not how I
doing.
encounter it.
Yeah. But in
Okay.
many ways, I think that the arrangement of our piece is we want to first look at how a mechanical Turks is organized and what it thinks the task is. And then we want to get a sense of now how do then Turkers respond to
Hmm.
that? Because in
Yeah.
part what we're interested in is we're interested in the cultural technique that parses what a human intelligence task is. And then so the next step is then, okay, now what do humans, how do they respond to that parsing, right? What does that
Yeah.
parsing do to their understanding of their labor and whether or not they're being fairly compensated, right? Because now we're using compensation levels to help us get a sense of the cuts that are being made. And then we're then going to potentially use compensation levels to measure the effects of those cuts.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe if you can write up some of those observations here under the categorizing, or wherever fits on this preliminary findings thing, because ultimately, I mean, this is stuff potentially we can transform into the write-up itself.
Oh,
I mean,
this
the
is
result.
gold, Jerry. Gold.
And I'll move forward probably with this word level stuff, although we'll see how far I can get it all given the stretch of the
Well,
semester we're
and I
entering.
think there's going to be a fair amount of, I mean, I went in looking for those, I went in at the level of key terms and pairs and kind of kept bouncing back and forth between these two, right? Categorizing data and key term pairs. That I think
Yeah.
that it may be difficult to just do one or the other because if as soon as you start thinking about these key terms or pairs, you're now doing you're now back up into categorizing data.
Yeah.
So, which
Because
I think
that's
is good.
precisely what this does.
I think that means we're at the stage we need to be where these things are starting to pull together. Because right, like the mechanical Turk tasks themselves, right? We've got to have some to make any sense of those pairs. We've got to have some context we're putting them in. So,
Yeah.
if we're looking at a damaged house, we have to have a bunch of undamaged houses in mind, which would be really interesting too. I mean, that might be a too specialized thing to go in, but I mean, you start thinking about all these other sort of categories we could use that, right? The issues of identity of the Turker. I mean, I'm imagining, right? You've got if you can understand, right, the socioeconomic status of a Turker, right? What are they going to see as damage or not,
Mm.
right? Or they, right, type
Yeah.
A or not, right? I'm even thinking about me and my spouse, and when we're in the house, what are things in the house that bug me that don't bug her?
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's not really damage. That's just character.
It's livable.
Or,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Right. What's your standard for, I mean, again, that might be
Yeah.
something to parse in, but it also seems to be what potentially, right, that kind of task is rated at a higher compensation level. But what's interesting is that the higher the compensation level goes, the less mechanical that feedback's going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So weirdly enough, the compensation level is higher, but you're not getting what, I mean, I'm imagining that the reason someone goes to Mechanical Turks, right, is they want as mechanical, rote, objective a response as possible. But potentially the more they pay, the more diverse range of, I mean, I'm also just thinking conspiratorial. I'm wondering why someone would want lots of different opinions on whether a house was damaged or not.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm imagining what an insurance adjuster will use that information for. well, 80% of Turkers said your house isn't damaged.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So even if we accept it's being used for, say, insurance purposes, that in itself is not neutral. You know.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Well, I'm
anyway.
gonna have to wrap it up.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we'll move forward as much as we can with the remainder of the academic semester. Probably a lot of this will have to open up when that concludes.
Yeah. But we'll keep plugging away.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, there's something here.
Yeah. The issue is there are many things here. We just need to pick a couple and put them in a line because.
But I think having the weighted, unweighted, that makes me more sort of comfortable leading into one or the other, because we've got to, early on, right, that we're kind of doing this kind of exploratory, inventional kind of approach. But I think we can use some of these juxtapositions to we're aware that we're doing it this way.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that we're doing that, I think liberates us enough to kind of play within that, then knowing that we can always back out and go back in another way. If you know what I mean, like we're sort of justifying our results by being I don't know, aware of the
Conscious of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
All right. Well, I will see you in a fortnight.
Indeed.
All right. Take it easy.
Bye.